decided to dance through his last show. So I have the privilege and honor of introducing Vanderbilt's current department manager and educator, Mr. Roger Richardson. Roger came into our leadership group, over 3 years ago now, and I have to say, he has single-handedly raised the professionalism level, not just within our little office in Vanderbilt, but across our department. He has extensive knowledge, both on the clinical side, but from the corporate side as well. So I consider him not only a colleague, but a mentor, because I pick his brain all the time. I learned probably on day 2, when he moved into the manager role, that this guy was always scheming about something. It took him about 2 hours of walking into his office to come over to my door and say, "Hey, Craig, I've got an idea. What if we do?" But I'm very appreciative of his leadership within our department. So please welcome Mr. Roger Richardson.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks everybody at home. I hope you can see me. I hope you can hear me. I have lots of graphics in this. But first, I want to thank the leadership of Encore Health, especially Colleen Schaubacher and Gene and Zach Gant, and all last night I called Zach Gene, and he didn't correct me. So, but especially inviting me back after my emotional breakdown last November. So, here it goes. So, if you will notice on the slide, it says a storytelling imperative. And I've learned over the past 2 years of COVID that telling stories is really important. And stories are data with the soul. And I especially wanted to do that this time. Get this to play, hopefully, because of this. Now, why am I showing a box of white rice with me counting it? Because one time that I spoke, I thought I did really well with all my data, and this was the comment. So people would rather hurt just a little bit. So anyway, so today we're going to do some storytelling. And then after I overcame my fear of white rice and Colleen published the Symposium data, this is what I saw. I'm the last speaker on both days. I said, what the? And so I apologize for my thoughts and language. And then when I started looking at the 2 titles that I wanted to talk about, the first one was today's The Reality of Leadership for Patient Safety, linked with the language of the power of language related to ethics for the respiratory care practitioner. The 2 topics kept merging together more and more. So I'm going to be going back and forth between the 2 this hour and then the last hour, and I hope we have a good time with my storytelling. So I have some more empirical data about storytelling, and it's related to the Microsoft Human Lab. And this is a study they've recently published for people who are in meeting after meeting after meeting without a break. And so that was another one of my fears. Speaking last, this is what I was going to see. And what you see on the top are the brains that get angry without a break, get disingenuous, get disconnected. But if you take a break, you're able to cool down and pay attention. So I have a concept of how we're going to do this presentation with some breaks. And I also have some real empirical data. You guys all know Mr. Rooks. You can get here. This is his professional side that you see, and this is his bio. But in our day-to-day workflow, this is Craig when I tell him good news. This is Craig when I tell him bad news or good news, doesn't matter. And this is what this is how Craig looks at me when I give him excellent news. However, over the past 2 years when we've been on Zoom, this is what I've done to Craig. So it's my Zoom, my scheming with him, this caused him to look like that. So with all these things, I wanted to come up today with some official objectives that didn't put you to sleep, that did not cause you to get angry, and we're going to talk about defining reality-based leadership and what that means for the respiratory care in relation to patient safety. And then I want to educate you on how adopting reality-based leadership in times of crisis leads to improved patient safety. And then, of course, I would love a forum of questions for exchange. However, as Mr. Rook said, I'm all constantly scheming. What I really wanted to do today is provide some edutainment. I'm a huge believer in the combination of entertainment and education makes it fun. And I have determined over almost 3.5 years of running the Vanderbilt Respiratory Enterprise for Education that there is not one respiratory therapist that can sing and dance. Because I've asked everybody, me included. So, with that, I'm going to avoid some white rice presentation with real life scenarios. I'm going to give us a break by telling you a story about the mage tank, and then I'm going to tell you a second story about angels. Now, I have lots of stories all the time through my history. So,
Sir,
yeah.
Would you mind placing your hand?
This is embarrassing. I'm sorry, what are you asking me to do?
Will you place your hand on this Bible and swear that these are true stories?
Oh.
You swear the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I, Roger Richardson, swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
You may continue with your story.
Because what I'm going to share with you, you will probably think, he's making that up. And I'm really not. But let's pull back the curtain and talk about why we're all here. We're all here related to being a respiratory care practitioner, and we're all here based upon the law. We're all here based upon the thing that I've studied for the past 10 years to try to understand. And when you get down into the law that we all practice under as respiratory care practitioners, there's some key components that create patient safety. But the real reason that we're here today is because, and I'm much faster than this computer, so I apologize there, because when you go to our law and you look at the rules, it talks about continuing education, and it's very, very specific, and this changed about 5 years ago related to how many continuing education credits we need. And so when you look at it, the one that's highlighted here, it says at least 1 hour of the 12 must pertain to patient safety defined as the TJC, so the Joint Commission. So in my legal analysis and what I do, I said, okay, I've got to go study the Joint Commission to go speak at Smoky Mountain. And so I did that, and I spent hours looking at the national patient safety goals, and it's just not one. They have goals for home care, long-term care, ambulatory care, behavior care, and of course acute care, and then hospital care. But when you really take the microscope down and look at those, they're all related to actions with specific steps of rationale. So I'm sure, like Mr. Rook's slides, that you can all read this. But when you understand what Joint Commission is asking us to do, there are specific steps of like 2 patient identifiers to make sure we don't give therapy or procedures to the wrong patient. And then they go on and talk about medication management, and why do we do what we do, and why are we scanning medications and a patient armband now? Because it's safe and practical. And I went through pages and pages and hours of hours trying to understand this from a legal mindset as well as a practitioner mindset, and it came up with some basic understandings of things that you do every day in your clinical practice that I do in my day of clinical practice, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be as boring as a white rice thing. So what I did, I kept doing research, and I researched more and more, and I found official posting from the Joint Commission that talked about the safety of care related to the mental health of the practitioners at the bedside during this COVID time. I said, boom, there it is. That's all I needed. We're going to talk about the mental health for patient safety. So this is sanctioned by the Joint Commission, therefore sanctioned by the state, therefore you're going to get a CRCE. Thank you, Roger. But we've been scanning, I hope you've been by our booth, and we've been scanning and doing a survey related to your mental health as compared to the ones at Vanderbilt. So this survey was done within our department, and you can see that 88% of the staff who took this survey said that COVID had affected their mental well-being. It really gave me some concern. Also, we have 12% who were kind of neutral. I don't know who these were, it was blinded. They haven't been living our reality. So, what was even more disturbing, though, of that, from what this slide showed, and it's very hard to read, but only about 7 or 8% of our staff reached out for help. And that concerned me greatly. So I was one of those on here that reached out for help. And now it's telling me I'm connecting here, so let's see if it will. I'm getting some technical errors. Just a second.
Just keep going.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Progress.
Progress, there we go.
Making progress.
Making progress. Just 1 second. It's going to catch up on us, I hope. Well, where's our IT guy?
Just keep going.
Okay.
People at home are totally understanding.
Okay, thank you people at home, thank you people here. So,
Got a rough day too.
really, the next, I'll let you help me right there. What you have to do is minimize that and keep going. There we go. So, what we realized, thank you, Craig, through the mental health of what we have, that in our society today, we've all not been in the same boat, even though we've been going through the same storm. Some people have been able to work at home and protect themselves and loved ones and their family. And some people, so therefore they've been in yachts. Other people have been in lifeboats, and other people are just treading water. Some of our people are underwater. We've been underwater. And the more that I looked at this, the more that I studied it, and I kept bringing it back to patient safety, how are we as practitioners going to be able to provide safe and effective care if we are in trauma? And this is a great slide from the American Psychoanalytic Association, and they have deemed a new terminology for this, pandemic trauma and stress experience. And it really is an interesting emotional thing. And of course, their advice is, well, everybody has a shorter fuse. Pause, compose yourself, and give grace. Easier said than done. And is this our new normal? Are we RRTs PSTEs? Is that going to be our credential in our life? What can we do about it? What do we need to understand about our mental health and the facts of human behavior? So this may seem familiar to any of you who were on last year. This is our circle of fear, our circle of learning, and then we hope that we can move from the circle of fear, which has things like blaming and being toxic and being angry and seeing things from a very small prism, and we want to go to a learning circle and then eventually to the growth circle. But I found myself this year blaming all the time. So, just 1 second, we will go to the next slide as soon as the computer will let us. So let's see what the experts say about blame.
How many of you are blamers? How many of you, when something goes wrong, the first thing you want to know is whose fault it is? Hi, my name is Brene. I'm a blamer. Let me just tell you this quick story. So this was a couple of years ago when I first realized the magnitude to which I blame. I'm in my house, I'm on white slacks and a pink sweater set, and I'm drinking a cup of coffee in my kitchen. It's a full cup of coffee. I drop it on the tile floor. It goes into a million pieces, splashes up all over me. And a millisecond after it hit the floor, right out of my mouth is this: damn you, Steve. Who's my husband? Because let me tell you how fast this works for me. So Steve plays water polo with a group of friends, and the night before he went to go play water polo. And I said, hey, make sure you come back at 10, because you have to never fall asleep into your home. And he got back up at 10:30. And so I went to bed a little bit later than I thought. Ergo, my second cup of coffee that I probably would not be having had me come home when we discussed. Therefore, and so the rest of that story is I'm cleaning up the kitchen. Steve calls, caller ID. I'm like, hey. He's like, hey, what's going on, babe? What's going on? So I'll tell you exactly what's going on. I'm cleaning up the coffee that spilled off, like dial tone. Because he knows. How many of you go to that place when something bad happens, the first thing you want to know is whose fault is it? I'd rather it be my fault than no one's fault. Because why? Why? Because it gives us some semblance of control. But here, if you enjoy blaming, this is where you should stick your fingers in your ear and do the no thing, because I'm getting ready to ruin it for you. Because here's what we know from the research. Blame is simply the discharging of discomfort and pain. It has an inverse relationship with accountability. Accountability, by definition, is a vulnerable process. It means me calling you and saying, hey, my feelings were really hurt about this, and talking. It's not blaming. Blaming is simply a way that we discharge anger. People who blame a lot seldom have the tenacity and grit to actually hold people accountable, because we expend all of our energy raging for 15 seconds and figuring out whose fault something is. And blaming is very corrosive in relationships, and it's one of the reasons we miss our opportunities for empathy. Because when something happens and we're hearing a story, we're not really listening. We're in the place where I was, making the connections as quickly as we can about whose fault something is.
Thank you for listening to that. So Dr. Brene Brown is, she's big. She's really big. However, she is a qualitative researcher. And I went to Dr. Brown's work because one of the comments from my presentation, where I bawled in front of 300 people last year, was somebody said, thank you for being vulnerable with us. I had no idea what that meant. And so for about 25 years, Dr. Brown has researched shame and vulnerability and fear and all of those things. And then I started looking at what does qualitative research really mean for us as respiratory therapists. And there's a big fancy definition of that here on the screen. But it still didn't help me. So I went back to my early years as a professional when I grabbed a book in the airport by Jim Collins called Good to Great. Good to Great basically changed my mindset. It changed my life. And what's so important about this book is that 22 years later, it's been updated, and the science behind Good to Great is still relevant today, which tells you it is meaningful. In Good to Great, Dr. Collins talks about establishing big, audacious goals, and it's all about mindset. And when I read that book, and I was dealing with a lot of engineers and lawyers and what I determined high-powered professionals, and it inspired me to establish a big, hairy, audacious goal with somebody with an associate's degree. And I said, someday I'm going to go to law school, and I did it. He also talks about being a level 5 leader in times of crisis and humility, and how you overcome those type of challenges, and what makes companies go good to great. But then he's published books about public sector, which includes all of us, about going from good to great. And then I researched Simon Sinek's Start With Why. And Mr. Gant spoke eloquently about why today. And that's the foundation of Mr. Sinek's work. And then he's just published a book called The Infinite Game. And we're going to talk a lot about that on Friday. And then I looked into research related to Cy Wakeman and her reality-based leadership, which I stole the title for this presentation, full disclosure. And then I went and looked at these other authors you see here on the screen. And so emotional intelligence and Dare to Lead, and then Oprah. Of course, she's Oprah, and we're going to talk about that. But when I really started doing the research, the connectivity that you see on the screen there between Collins and Dr. Goldman's work for emotional intelligence were back and forth. They kept referring to themselves for about 20 years. And then both of them in the late teens reflected on Dr. Brown's work, Dare to Lead, who talked about vulnerability. And then Dr. Brown talked with Simon Sinek about her work and his work. They both share research together. They both have podcasts together, and all four of those people have been on the podcast. And then Oprah reached out to Dr. Brown, and then Dr. Brown has been on Oprah's Soul for Sunday, and Oprah's been on Dr. Brown's podcast, and then Oprah refers to Cy Wakeman, and Cy Wakeman refers to Simon Sinek. So there you have it. What do all these things have in common? They all talk about the health of emotional wellness, regardless of what company, what business that you're in. And so what I did is I really went back to Brene Brown and listened to her and studied her work about vulnerability so I could share it with you. So in full disclosure, copying one author is plagiarism, copying many is research. That's what we're doing today. So if you have an opportunity and want to learn more about yourself and the world we live in, I'd highly recommend listening to Unlocking Us and Dare to Lead. Great podcast. They're hosted by Dr. Brown, and she has all the different things that we are facing in life today. So she got her start, though, in 2010 with a TED Talk that actually is now viewed more than 60 million times. And I'm going to ask you to indulge with me for about 9 minutes, and let's listen to how Dr. Brown got started in this topic.
So I'll start with this. A couple of years ago, an event planner called me because I was going to do a speaking event, and she called and she said, "I'm really struggling with how to write about you on the little flyer." And I thought, well, what's the struggle? And she said, "Well, I saw you speak, and I'm going to call you a researcher, I think, but I'm afraid if I call you a researcher, no one will come because they'll think you're boring and irrelevant." And I was like, okay. And she said, but the thing I liked about your talk is, you're a storyteller. So I think what I'll do is just call you a storyteller. And of course, the academic, insecure part of me was like, "You're going to call me a what?" And she said, "I'm going to call you a storyteller." And I was like, "Oh, why not Magic Pixie?" I was like, I don't, let me think about this for a second. And so I tried to call deep on my courage. And I thought, I am a storyteller. I'm a qualitative researcher. I collect stories. That's what I do. And maybe stories are just data with a soul, and maybe I'm just a storyteller. So I said, you know what? Why don't you just say I'm a researcher storyteller? And she went, "There's no such thing." So I'm a researcher or storyteller. And I'm going to talk to you today, and we're talking about expanding perception. And so I want to talk to you and tell some stories about a piece of my research that fundamentally expanded my perception and really actually changed the way that I live and love and work and parent. And this is where my story starts. When I was a young researcher, a doctoral student, my first year I had a research professor who said to us, "Here's the thing, if you cannot measure it, it does not exist." And I thought he was just sweet-talking me. I was like, "Really?" And he's like, "Absolutely." So you have to understand that I have a bachelor's in social work, a master's in social work, and I was doing my PhD in social work. So my entire academic career was surrounded by people who kind of believed in the life's messy, love it, and I'm more of the life's messy, clean it up, organize it, and put it into a bento box. And so to think that I had found my way, to found a career that takes me, really one of the big sayings in social work is lean into the discomfort of the work. And I'm like, knock discomfort upside the head and move it over and get all A's. That was my mantra. So I was very excited about this. And so I thought, you know what? This is the career for me. Because I am interested in some messy topics, but I want to be able to make them not messy. I want to understand them. I want to hack into these things that I know are important and lay the code out for everyone to see. So where I started was with connection, because by the time you're a social worker for 10 years, what you realize is that connection is why we're here. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. This is what it's all about. It doesn't matter whether you talk to people who work in social justice and mental health and abuse and neglect. What we know is that connection, the ability to feel connected, is neurobiologically, that's how we're wired, it's why we're here. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to start with connection. Well, you know that situation where you get an evaluation from your boss, and she tells you 37 things that you do really awesome, and one thing that you kind of have an opportunity for growth. And all you can think about is that opportunity for growth, right? Well, apparently this is the way my work went as well, because when you ask people about love, they tell you about heartbreak. When you ask people about belonging, they'll tell you the most excruciating experiences of being excluded. And when you ask people about connection, the stories they told me were about disconnection. So very quickly, really about 6 weeks into this research, I ran into this unnamed thing that absolutely unraveled.
So we're back, I hope. Bear with us at home. It's like we've lost connection a little bit. So correct it.
Progress.
So we canceled that, we minimized this, and we keep going.
Connection in a way that I didn't understand or had never seen. And so I pulled back out of the research and thought, I need to figure out what this is. And it turned out to be shame. And shame is really easily understood as the fear of disconnection. Is there something about me that if other people know it or see it, that I won't be worthy of connection? The things I can tell you about it, it's universal. We all have it. The only people who don't experience shame have no capacity for human empathy or connection. No one wants to talk about it, and the less you talk about it, the more you have it. What underpinned this shame, this I'm not good enough, which we all know that feeling, I'm not blank enough, I'm not thin enough, rich enough, beautiful enough, smart enough, promoted enough. The thing that underpinned this was excruciating vulnerability. This idea of, in order for connection to happen, we have to allow ourselves to be seen, really seen. And you know how I feel about vulnerability. I hate vulnerability. And so I thought, this is my chance to beat it back with my measuring stick. I'm going in, I'm going to figure this stuff out, I'm going to spend a year, I'm going to totally deconstruct shame, I'm going to understand how vulnerability works, and I'm going to outsmart it. So I was ready, and I was really excited. As you know, it's not going to turn out well. You know this. So I could tell you a lot about shame, but I'd have to borrow everyone else's time. But here's what I can tell you that it boils down to. And this may be one of the most important things that I've ever learned in the decade of doing this research. My 1 year has turned into 6 years. Thousands of stories, hundreds of long interviews, focus groups. At one point, people were sending me journal pages and sending me their stories, thousands of pieces of data, and 6 years. And I kind of got a handle on it. I kind of understood this is what shame is, this is how it works. I wrote a book. I published a theory that something was not okay. And what it was is that if I roughly took the people I interviewed and divided them into people who really have a sense of worthiness. That's what this comes down to, a sense of worthiness. They have a strong sense of love and belonging. And folks who struggle for it, and folks who are always wondering if they're good enough. There was only one variable that separated the people who have a strong sense of love and belonging and the people who really struggle for it, and that was the people who have a strong sense of love and belonging believe they're worthy of love and belonging. That's it. They believe they're worthy. And to me, the hard part of the one thing that keeps us out of connection is our fear that we're not worthy of connection, was something that personally and professionally I felt like I needed to understand better. So what I did is I took all of the interviews where I saw worthiness, where I saw people living that way, and just looked at those. What do these people have in common? And I have a slight office supply addiction, but it's another talk. So I had a manila notebook, a manila folder, and I had a Sharpie, and I was like, what am I going to call this research? And the first words that came to my mind were wholehearted. These are kind of wholehearted people living from this deep sense of worthiness. So I wrote at the top of the manila folder, and I started looking at the data. In fact, I did it first in this in a 4-day, very intensive data analysis where I went back, pulled these interviews, pulled the stories, pulled the incidents. What's the theme? What's the pattern? My husband left town for the kids because I always go into this kind of Jackson Pollock crazy thing where I'm just like writing and going and kind of just in my researcher mode. And so here's what I found. What they had in common was a sense of courage. And I want to separate courage and bravery for you for a minute. Courage, the original definition of courage, when it first came into the English language, it's from the Latin word cur, meaning heart. And the original definition was to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. And so these folks had, very simply, the courage to be imperfect. They had the compassion to be kind to themselves first and then to others, because as it turns out, we can't practice compassion with other people if we can't treat ourselves kindly. And the last was they had connection, and this was the hard part, as a result of authenticity. They were willing to let go of who they thought they should be in order to be who they were, which is, you have to absolutely do that for connection. The other thing that they had in common was this.
Hate that
They
word.
fully embraced vulnerability. They believed that what made them vulnerable made them beautiful. They didn't talk about vulnerability being comfortable, nor did they really talk about it being excruciating, as I had heard it earlier in the shame interviewing. They just talked about it being necessary. They talked about the willingness to say, I love you first. The willingness to do something where there are no guarantees. The willingness to breathe through waiting for the doctor to call after your mammogram. The willing to invest in a relationship that may or may not work out. They thought this was fundamental. I personally thought it was betrayal. I could not believe I had pledged allegiance to research, where our job, the definition of research is to control and predict, to study phenomenon for the explicit reason to control and predict. And now my mission to control and predict had turned up the answer that the way to live is with vulnerability and to stop controlling and predicting. This led to a little breakdown, which actually looked more like this. And it did.
Thanks for tolerating that, but it's going to make some sense in a little while, especially related to the white rice. Okay, so let's get the computer back running here. So all of the work 10 years ago has led to Dare to Lead by Dr. Brown, related to rumbling with vulnerability and living with values and braving trust. And I realized that the comment of, I'd rather count grains of white rice than listen to Roger Richardson speak was related because I wasn't being the authentic self. I wasn't being who I really was. I was hiding that out of shame, out of fear. And so, the more that I studied Dr. Brown's work, she believed strongly that you've got to own your own story. That we're wired for stories, and that's our connection, it's our biology. And she says owning our own story and loving ourselves is the bravest thing we ever can do. So I'm going to tell you about my story. I believe in coffee all the time. I believe that donuts are food. And if you have coffee and donuts, and at night, oh, hold on, ice cream, come on, ice cream. It's not working. Anyway, ice cream. But my real story starts with this lady right here. This is my mother. So, and my father. I swore I wasn't going to do this. This picture of my mother in 1945, at high school graduation, and it's funny because she played the tuba. Because there were no men in her high school class in the marching band. They were all marching to war while my father was serving in the Navy. My father finished 4 more years in the Navy, and then he became an accountant with a degree from OBU in Oklahoma City. My mother was from Ponca City, so they met at Conoco Oil in the accounting department, and 24 days later, they were married. That'll tell you about my story right there. The night of their wedding in the church that you see here, the church burned down. True story. Fast forward a few years, and this is the very first picture of me. And why am I saying it's the first picture of me? Because you can see the stunned kind of look on my mother's face, and especially my sister's face, because my mother's sister was a professional photographer, and she was there visiting, took this picture right after my mother got the news that she was pregnant with me. So fast forward a few more months, my mother's in the B bed of a semi-private room. The nurse comes in after 2 days and said, "Miss Richardson, you have got to name this child, you've got to do the birth pattern." My mother, who very logical person, had 1 girl, 2 boys. A girl would just round it out if she had to have another one. And my mother said, "I haven't given any thought to a boy's name." And the lady in the A bed said, "Well, if I was going to have a boy and she had had a girl, I was going to name him Roger Keith." And my mother said, "That'll do." That's how I got the name. True story. So fast forward, while my father had moved my mother and 3 siblings to Stanford to get a master's degree, and then to Fort Worth, Texas to work on his doctorate degree, which is a doctor of theology, accounting theology. It was really kind of weird. But you can see we're here in 1965, and my sister, God rest her soul as an angel, the oldest of 4 boys. But she always protected us. She always was there with us. And in 1975, she graduated from high school, went to nursing school, but came home every weekend. And so finally, color film was developed. Our family's life circled around going to church. I was born on a Sunday night, and what you didn't know that my mother and that time, 3 siblings were in church by Wednesday night. And so during high school, all I remember is singing hymns and praying about my problems. We didn't talk about our emotions. Everything was fine. It was always fine in my home, regardless of the stresses. And my mother would always say, it's fine, everything is fine. And I realized that it was not that everything was fine and she was trying to sugarcoat, but it was an optimism that tomorrow will be better. Tomorrow will be better. So while she worked, my father was off being a spiritual somewhere. That's a whole nother topic we won't talk about today. My sister raised me. So fast forward now, circa 1985. And this is when I met Colleen. This is when I met Candy. That's what I look like. So enough of the science. Are you ready for a break? Let's talk about the H-Tank story. Around this time, as Craig mentioned, I'm a schemer. I figured out I could make more money if I went into home care, and I could still kind of work nights, and I still, it would be okay. I could could do both of these, and so I was hired to do home care. And my very first home care job was where I had to set up oxygen cylinders and oxygen concentrators. And let's just take a look at this next slide. Well, we can get it to go.
Keep in mind that the average gas cylinder weighs about 80 pounds. Thousands of sprains, strains, bruises, and broken bones occur each year as a result of unsafe handling techniques.
So, I show up at the home care office the first day, and to me, this is what the home care truck looked like. It's just a depiction. And notice there's some European writing on that. We'll get to that in a minute. But the gentleman who hired me said, "You watch the safety videos?" Of course, the one I just showed you. Oh, of course. I'm worked at the hospital. I know all about H cylinders. And he said, "Well, great, because we've gotten a referral for a hospice patient. Everything's loaded in the home care truck for you. And so this is where the address is." And I said, "Great, I've got it." And I'm thinking to myself, oh God. I get to the truck and I said, "Hold on, I've never driven a truck before." Well, I get to the home care patient's house, and it's right across Middle Tennessee, from Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro. And I figured out that I needed to back that truck in. I was smart enough to do that. So I backed the truck up. I lifted up, got out of the truck, lifted up the back of the truck, saw the concentrator, saw the E-cylinder, and the next thing I knew, the patient's wife was at my side. And she said, "I need that oxygen in the E-cylinder. I need his oxygen set up now." And I said, "Okay, you go ahead and take this in. I'm going to bring in the big backup truck." Now, I wasn't smart enough to even think, well, let's get the patient set up on the concentrator and the E-cylinder first. I was more worried because I didn't know about how I was going to handle this 80-pound H tank, and I weighed about 110 pounds. And I'd never done this before. So the wife goes on in with the E-cylinder, and I pull the H-cylinder halfway out of the truck and had it balanced because there was a hand dolly in there, and I knew if I grabbed that hand dolly and I would just put it on the ground, I could slide the H-tank down. I'm smart. I can figure this out, and we've got a little connection problem here again, so let's wait because this is important. And I want to get the story right. Just a second. Can everybody still see us at home, I hope? Are we still connected back there? We're good, okay. So, let's just watch what happened. Let's watch that again. Now keep in mind, that's showing the tank dropping off about 2 inches. This was coming about 3.5 feet from the height of the back of the truck. And what happened is when I turned around, thinking I was so smart to use body mechanics, I touched that H-cylinder and it was unbalanced and it went whoop, right down on my foot. Oh. So, this is what it felt like. Oh well, to me. So I am screaming. I hardly understand what's going on. My foot is swelling to the point as I watch the H-cylinder roll down the driveway in the street. And at that time, the next thing that I know, I'm starting to go black. And I'm thinking, if I can just get my shoe off. And at that moment, the wife is by my side. And she said, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm going to be fine. I just need to take my shoes off." And I had a brand new pair of Baswegians with tassels. They were very cool. No steel-toed shoes for this guy. So I took my shoe off, and my foot was bleeding profusely, and my big toe was almost non-existent. So the next thing I knew, she grabs me as I'm starting to pass out, puts me in the passenger seat of the truck. She's buckling up, and she says, "Hold on, darling. I've never driven a truck before." Boom! We're off to the ER. Now keep in mind, I have just quit the hospital she's taking me to in Murfreesboro. I am begging her, "Please don't call the company, please don't call the company. They'll fix me, I'll come back and set up your oxygen." Well, we're off to the hospital. God knows what was happening to her husband who needed the oxygen. My very first home care patient. So she drives like a bat out of hell. She pulls into the emergency room. People I know come out. Blood is all up my leg. They get me on the stretcher. They pull me back in. And of course, this is probably before a lot of the safety features we have today in our trauma bays. We just have these little curtains. And then the exact moment that, as any good trauma team did, they stripped me down to find out what was wrong. I was completely, from the waist down, completely exposed. The curtain comes back, and she says, the wife is there saying, "Honey, don't worry, I called the company." So I'm probably the only respiratory therapist that has completely exposed himself to his very first home care patient's wife. True story. So, this is how I remember her today. She was my hero. And the company took care of me. So that's my story for vulnerability. What do you think, Sophie?
What happened to your foot?
I walk with a little limp, but it's fine. But what the irony is, fast forward another 15 years, and I'm working for Lindy Gas, and I'm responsible for the world's largest H-tank manufacturer in the world, and I'm the vice president. So, being vulnerable means that you have to take risk, and you have to give grace. I'm standing here today. Let's talk about reality. We're going to talk about COVID and reality leadership, and this is what I want to talk about now. Of all of those stories, we're coming back to the science. So that was your H-tank story, true story. And in all my research in how do we handle what we're going through with COVID is a reality-based leadership. And that is by Cy Wakeman. And she has this reality-based leadership, life's messy type of book in the No Ego book. And her teaching is that we all examine ourselves through different filters, and your ego is not your amigo. And you have to ask, what is your reality? So when you're working with COVID, what really is your reality? And then the question is, what is your story? What is the story in your head telling you right now? It may not be the right story. And then what do you know for sure? And then in any situation, what would great look like? So when we're facing the challenges and you get frustrated with your coworkers or frustrated with XYZ, fill in the blank, what could you do right now to make it better? And we've started to look at this from a situation at work with what would add more value, your opinion or your action. So many times we will see things that should be done and we just say, well, in my opinion, I would do it this way, and we don't go do it. Go do it. So from a time standpoint, I would encourage you to go and research some of Dr. Wakeman's work, but we're going to, with our technology problem here, we're going to just kind of move on a little bit, I hope. Let's see, there we go. And her work relies very heavily on Dr. Daniel Goleman, who started the international phrase of emotional intelligence, and he's a known psychologist that has influenced all across the companies and what he's been able to do, countries. And what he's able to do is to define what is emotional intelligence. So let's listen to this for just a second.
Daniel Goleman, Augie EQ, otherwise known as emotional intelligence. It's made up of these 5 things. Number 1, self-awareness. This is knowing one's emotions as they happen. If you can do this, you'll make better decisions. Number 2, managing emotions. This is the ability to handle feelings. People that can manage their emotions are good at bouncing back from the setbacks in life. Number 3, self-motivation. Number 4, empathy. This is recognizing emotions in others. This is the people skill that makes people better at teaching, sales, and management. And last of all, handling relationships. These abilities lead to popularity, leadership, and interpersonal effectiveness.
So let's talk about this in our world. When we talk about self-awareness, we want to understand that definition. We want to understand the hallmarks of that. It's so interesting to read that, and each of you probably do this every day and that you don't realize it in the social situations. And then self-regulations is very important. That's the next one, and Dr. Goldman talks about the hallmarks of that. And tomorrow I'm going to talk about the politics of language of the respiratory therapist. And most of you probably do this every day and probably don't get credit for it or don't even realize it, that in the morning you may be talking to a family member and educating them on something, and that family member may not have a high school education. And in the same hour you're talking to an MD, PhD, or an hospital administrator, and your language that you use and that you've acquired in your clinical practice serves us very well. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. And then we need to talk about motivation. Mr. Gant talked about knowing your why. And then we're going to also look at empathy, which I think respiratory practitioners have some of the greatest empathy out there, and the hallmarks. And I wish this was a little clearer and a little longer and we had more time, but we're going to touch base on this tomorrow. And then the last thing that we need to talk about is our social skills. And I think we all have those that are well attuned. So this is what makes up emotional intelligence. Now, I'm going to skip this one as well because it's a YouTube clip that's not connected. Well, it is connecting. Let's see if we can get it to play. There we go. Thank you, IT guy. There we go.
I've come to believe that the most important question you can ask anyone in a moment of struggle or crisis is not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. And in our new book, renowned trauma and brain development expert Dr. Bruce Perry and I discuss why asking this fundamental question is so revolutionary to understanding why we do the things we do.
Oprah and I are convinced the answer helps each of us understand how experiences, both good and bad, shape us.
So the personal stories, including my own experiences with trauma,
Combined with the brain science, will help all of us.
what happened to you is now available at
So we have more time tomorrow. We'll talk about the brain science and what trauma has done to all of us as humans, and that it's not just someone that's gone to war, but it builds up over time. And what I think we've been through the past couple of years, and with the COVID world, not being in a yacht, we've been treading water. This is important to understand. And so we need to understand the tree of regulation in our brain, and we need to understand what's going on with that and the stresses related to that. So I would encourage you, if you have an opportunity to study this work by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah, it's fascinating, and especially if any of you are pediatric practitioners, it talks a lot about children and what happened to you. And I know I've been very guilty in my clinical practice saying, what is wrong with that patient? That's not the right question. What happened to that patient? Especially my colleague here, I've heard you talk about the Murfreesboro VA. If you're working in the VA system, be very well aware of that. Now, what happened to me, I'm not really sure. This is me standing in my master bedroom closet, hanging out my dry cleaning. And everyone would be very happy to have dry cleaning like that, but not Roger. I take them off the wire hangers and put them on wooden hangers, and then I sort them by quality. My tuck shirt first, because it was the most expensive. So there again, what happened to me? What is it? And I started doing this out of stressors. It was something I could control. but it's not going to. So when we look at the science of Dr. Perry and what Oprah has done, we have to understand about our brain and that our senses take in all of the fact, and it's got to go through the lower brain to get to the upper brain for reasoning. So when we're dealing with patients that are not being reasonable, it's because we're not getting through them up to the reasoning part of the brain. And it's all emotion-based because of the senses that we all have and that we all need to understand. And you're going to be wasting your time if you're trying to reason with somebody that is dysregulated. And I see that more and more in our COVID lives with people that I'm thinking, what happened to them? What is going on with them at work? They've never acted this way before. And I think it's because we're kind of dysregulated. So I wish I could blame my synchronism, my hanging my laundry on wooden hangers on my siblings. This is us now. So me and the siblings, which brings us to, if I can get the computer to work, brings us to our second story that I promised you. And it's about a story of angels, which are all related to. So this is a picture of the sky, and this is a picture of Vanderbilt. 10 million square feet that we cover. And remember I was telling you that I was in that circle of fear and blaming everybody, and I was blaming the unvaccinated when we were spiking this summer. And we had our own staff calling out because of the stresses that they were going under. Well, one Saturday night in July, about 4 o'clock, I checked in with the leadership of our department, and they said, it's bad. I said, okay. I said, I'll be there. I'll be there at 7 o'clock, and you just put me where I need to be. Of course, when I hung up the phone, I was blaming the people who called in. I was blaming the people who were unvaccinated. I was blaming the whole system, and I was thinking, why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself and my life at risk? And I was in a really negative place. Well, I got to work, and I was assigned to SICU, and this is 9601. And I just got a report, and I got a stat call, we need you 9601. And when I got to that room, I thought, oh God, not this room. But I called on the courage, I called on the bravery, I called on being vulnerable, and I went in the room. The patient was a middle-aged female who just had a radical neck and a new tracheostomy with some terminal cancer. And her husband was visibly upset, and I took care of what I needed to do. And then I turned around, I was done, the patient was stable, and I looked at the man. And I said, I've been in this room before. I said, let's sit down and talk. So we talked about the process that his wife was going through, and what a tracheostomy meant, and how maybe with the speaking belt that she could communicate again. And I got him calmed down as my phone was going off, and I knew that there were other ventilator patients, and there's probably a blood gas sitting in the lab, and somebody coding, and I was taking care of that patient. So it was so interesting, the very first shift I had done in a while, in the very first room that I went into, I had to say, I've been in this room. So I left that room, and the 12 hours seemed to completely be crazy and fly by. I was getting ready to leave, and I checked in with the leadership, and I said, how is it going? And he said, I got to take a patient from MI over to the palliative care unit, all the way under the ground, and it's a huge walk, and I said, I'll do it. I've got somebody covering for me in SI, I'll do it. So I go down to MI, and I grab a portable ventilator, take the patient off of the Servo U, high tech, we put them on an EV300, get the patient all stable, the transport people there, the nurses there, and I say, let's go. The son and the wife of this particular patient, and we were moving them to palliative care because it had been determined that he was brain dead. And they're following us through this long tunnels of annual. We finally get up to the palliative care unit, and this is the room they took us to, 5444. And I said, oh God, not this room. But got in, The nurses didn't know we were coming, so there was a little squabble between the nurses. I didn't know we were coming, blah, 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 and all the time the family was hearing this. And so we finally got the patient transferred over. The nurses went on to give a report. I did my vent check, I did my patient assessment, I took care, and I looked over and the wife said, "This is wrong. Something's wrong." And I said, "It's okay." I said, "I've been in this room. Let's talk about it." And she said, "Well, over in the other room, we had a monitor on the ventilator, and he was hooked up, and I could hear, and I could see what was going on. This machine's not working. It's making a different sound." And I said, "I know." I said, "I've been in this room. So let's sit down." And we talked about the process of why we were on equipment A versus equipment B. We talked about what's going to happen tomorrow with the palliative care team. And I said, "I understand what you're going through." And so I took 15 to 20 extra minutes, and the family calmed down and they thanked me. And as I walked out of the room, thinking about all the different experiences I've had in that 12 hours, plus the other 15 people that were working that night and the lives that we were touching, and I thought, you know what, we are truly heroes. Sorry about this. Well, it went away. So I am going to need some technical support here now. It's gone away. Just so sorry at home, guys. We'll get started here in just a second. This is so I won't be vulnerable, right? There we go. Here. Yeah, there's Craig's face. That makes me feel better. Oh, there's the well, just so I get down to it. Let's see. There we go. Bear with me. It's a great story. So, slideshow. Thank you so much. When it kicks out, that's not my fault, right? Okay, here we go. Back to the story. So, I was thinking about the heroes and the situation and everything that we had been through, and I thought about a song I had just heard celebrating heroes in America. And hopefully it'll play. Maybe not. Oh, this is disappointing, but we're going to go back on the slide and see if we can get it clear. One of those technical things. Well, maybe not. Well, the song talks about who dares to lead, sings our nation's story, and it really touched my heart, because what we have in our country right now are heroes that are being unsung. And it talks about human spark divine. And I think each respiratory therapist is a human spark divine, what we do every day. And it talks about the wondrous new points of view. And I think we, through COVID, we've learned about courage, we've learned about resilience, we've learned about strength, we've learned about hope. And one of the things that I am so proud of is we're able to celebrate what we've been able to do through COVID. So I do believe that respiratory practitioners are human sparks divine. And ending the story, as we pull back the curtain, what I wasn't able to share with you, or what I didn't want to share with you because of my vulnerability, is that in 9601, is where I held my sister's hand, and she became an angel. Room 44 was the room my mother was in when she became an angel. And everything is fine. Everything is fine. So if you work in home care, if you work in long-term care, if you work in palliative care, long-term care, you're a human spark divine. So after that shift, I was exhausted. I walked out of the hospital just as the shuttle was approaching, which I could have hopped on the shuttle and ridden a few blocks to the parking garage, but something said, no, you've got to think about this. And I heard a voice that said, how can this be that the very first patient you took care of and the last patient you took up in those rooms out of 1,200 beds could be the rooms where you could make an impact for patient safety related to not the patient but to the family. And so I walked, and during that walk, I heard my mother's laughter. I heard my sister saying, "Good job, Roger, you did hold on. You held on tonight. We're very proud of you." And as I turned to look to the east when I got to the parking garage, the sun was coming up, and as loud as a trumpet, I heard my mother say, "Don't be afraid of the white rise." Thank you very much. We're going to talk about politics and ethics tomorrow. I look forward to it.